Stroud has the physical abilities. You have to remind yourself that this guy is a first-year starter.
Stroud, he stretches the play and whips it back to the end zone. Touchdown number 6 for Stroud.
Bryce Young loads, rips it to the end zone. Touchdown, Alabama. Bryce Young doing it all today. Might be a Heisman handshake right there.
Big man touchdown, you gotta love it. Way to go in there and make it happen. Get in the zone. Big man, get over with the left hand touchdown. I love it.
Oh, that thing is a thing of absolute beauty, and everybody wants it. We want it, but we are not going to get it. Somebody else is going to get it, and we're going to talk about who could possibly get the Heisman Trophy on the Heisman Show, presented by Nissan, premier partner of the Heisman Trophy. It was a solid weekend in college football. I feel like this was the weekend where things like actually happen.
Yeah, it's about time we got a little bit of indication and separation between the Heisman favorites, and we saw a big game.
Slight work, a little slight work from a guy that I threw a little bit of shade, not shade. I did, however, probably we'll get to that very shortly.
We'll get to it. We got tape.
Because I do have to take some things back. I have to take some things back. But let's talk about the weekend that was, because we had been talking about last week how all season long this race has been very interesting, because there hasn't really been a front runner in the way that we usually see front runners, especially when it comes to the players that we expected to be Heisman front runners going into this season. So let's take a look back at the weekend, and we start with the Alabama quarterback who has been at the forefront of this conversation the entire year. That is Alabama quarterback Bryce Young. So he had a really good game last weekend, obviously, and he got to add this to his resume, right? 5 touchdowns, 559 yards. Here's my question, though. Is he still the favorite after this past weekend?
Of course. What did he do to lose that title? What did he do to get taken off the throne? Nothing. Besides, become the second player in Alabama history with 5 passing touchdowns in consecutive games. And he had 559 yards passing. That is a school record within a single game. So after seeing C.J. Stroud take off in that last game, he comes and he does his thing. So Bryce Young, to me, is still the favorite because he hasn't done anything to take him off. And I know you have a point on why C.J. Stroud shouldn't be the favorite. So I think Bryce Young just makes his case better.
Well, so that was my question. That's the reason I asked if he is still the front runner, because obviously C.J. Stroud had an absolute baller of a game this past weekend. I was there. I actually decided to leave after the half, which, like, honestly, it was me, Harry Douglas, and Reese Davis were standing on the sideline for the first quarter. And at one point we were just like, should we just go? Is there any point in us being here? So let's talk about what he did. He absolutely lit up number 7 Michigan State with a school record tying 6 touchdowns in the first half for 432 yards. Do you think this guy made, because you know we always talk about a statement game. You have to have a statement game. Do you feel like this was his statement game?
Oh, yeah, most definitely, because this was all done in one half, Christine. His offense was on pace to have 1,000 yards in this game. They had to sit him down early, and he was sitting on the sideline dancing and just chilling and kicking it. But at the same time, 11 passing touchdowns in the last 2 games. And on top of that, he has another game with 5 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. 4 games this season. He's only the first player that's tied for the most ever in the last 20 seasons. So he's doing things that haven't been done in a long time.
Right.
And it's showing on the field. And he's not the best player on this team, and that's a point that Christine has made, and I agree with that, because those 3 wide receivers are some bad boys, and those bad boys are going to tear up any Michigan State defense that's bad.
Kirk Herbstreit started calling them Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I like that. I like that nickname for those guys. Let's move on, because on the other side of that matchup was Kenneth Walker III. And going into this matchup, we said that either C.J. Stroud or Kenneth Walker III have got to make a Heisman statement in this matchup, even though we already saw a Heisman statement from Kenneth Walker when they played Michigan. But the question is, he only rushed for six times for 25 yards in this matchup. Do you feel like because of that, even though he was a little bit banged up, that his Heisman campaign is done?
Oh, man. being outshined on a stage like that by somebody else who's competing with you for that Heisman position? I think so, unfortunately, because it was such a blunder on his Heisman candidacy. 6 rushes, 25 yards. But when you look at the game, it really wasn't his fault because they just got outplayed from the start until the end. The game script did not go well for them. So it was a huge hit for me personally.
All right, let's move on to the guy that I put at number 2 last week, mostly because he had 7 touchdowns at the beginning of the season. I know it was against Tulane, but however, he did play pretty well, and that is his Ole Miss quarterback, Matt Corral. He had a solid performance in Ole Miss's win over Vanderbilt. He had 326 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Now I can admit that he's not number 2 in this Heisman race, but how far do you feel like he is behind Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud?
Well, how can I quantify this? I would say 2 or 3 steps, if you want to say. But he's still having an incredible season, definitely one of the top players in the entire country, and there's a reason why he's a high draft prospect.
I mean, like I said, that performance that he had against, I don't think anybody was expecting him to bust out. That was his Heisman moment. Yeah. I don't think anybody was expecting him to just throw 7 touchdowns in a matchup at all. Let's move on to a defensive guy. And a lot of times defense needs love too. And, you know, obviously the Heisman is typically an award that goes to quarterbacks, the most important player on the best teams. But Georgia's Jordan Davis had a massive impact on the team's defense all season. And Saturday,
6.
He had himself a little thick 6. Where do you think he lines up? This is a defensive guy, okay? So we know he's kind of on the back end, but where do you think he lines up when it comes to his Heisman hopes?
The thing about Jordan Davis is a lot of his impact isn't reflected on the box score because he draws up double teams, he draws up triple teams, he's clogging up holes and just disrupting the entire offensive game plan. So I think he has as much impact on a game as a Heisman favorite has, but come on, ain't nobody showing no love to the big man
right,
these
the
days,
stats, if you can't see it on paper, a lot of people don't really think that you're really doing that much, but he is obviously, like you said, disrupting a lot of things. Okay, so let's take a look at the Heisman odds really fast because C.J. Stroud absolutely jumped Bryce Young. All right, so Bryce Young is not too far behind. He was first last week. Man. There's quite a gap, though, after C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. So do you feel like this is officially like a 2-man race? Is it just C.J. Stroud's and Bryce Young's to lose?
Yeah. How can one of these guys make up ground at this point in time, especially with the games that are left in front of Stroud and Young, in order for them to kind of battle it out for the CFP positioning? So this is now turned into their race to lose. I don't see any of those other guys making up any ground unless they throw for 8 touchdowns.
My number 5 is going to be C.J. Stroud.
The disrespect.
Because here's the thing. There are so many people on his team that are better than him, including Trayvon Henderson. You have Garrett Wilson. You have Chris Olave. Those players are better than him. So if he's not even the best player on the team, then how can I say he's the best player in college football? So I'm going to put him at number 5. I would just like to say, I don't necessarily change my stance in that there are some ballers on his team right now, okay? And most of them are receivers, the ones that we're talking about. However, we're going to change up our top 5 right now just to reassess because some players did ball out last weekend. So I'm going to let you start, Scoop. Who do you have at number 5?
At number 5, I had to drop the man from where he was last week at 3. I am going to put Kenneth Walker at number 5.
Okay. And the reason is because he just didn't play that well. But he was injured.
But the thing about the Heisman race is it's also about how you play injured. It's also about how you perform on the highest stage. And for me, it wasn't all his fault. Yeah, I understand that. The coach's game plan and that game flow did not go in his favor as well. But it was also an opportunity for him to take over the Heisman race, and one player outshined him over the other.
Okay, I get that, especially because going into that matchup, we said that we knew that either Kenneth Walker or C.J. Stroud were going to have to absolutely ball out in that game. Now, I'm not a Heisman voter, and we're going to talk to Heather Dinich a little later because she actually is. I feel like because I'm not, I can go a little reckless with my Heisman voting, and I'm just going to put our guy Jordan Davis at number 5 because I believe that big boys need love too, and he got himself a thick 6 this weekend.
heard that. Think 6.
So that's why I got JD at number 5. Who do you have at number 4?
At number 4, I am going to put Kenny Pickett.
Okay.
Kenny Pickett has been really the guy for this team. He's done a lot. He's about to break the ACC record for passing touchdowns overall, and I think he's definitely made a lot of noise this season to be a Heisman candidate. I mean, over 3,700 yards, 36 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions, and Mel Kiper has him ranked as number 1 QB prospect for a reason. So he's definitely got to be at least in the top 5 for Heisman.
Okay, I'm going to go my guy who I had at number 2 last week at number 4, and Matt Corral. Because, okay, here's the thing that we always talk about. We talk about people needing a Heisman moment.
Yeah.
And even though it was against Tulane, he did have 7 touchdowns earlier this season. And so I feel like that was his Heisman moment. Ole Miss obviously still in the conversation. So I'm going to go with him at number 4. Who do you have at number 3?
Number 3, I'm going to go who you just put there. I'm going to put Matt Corral at number 3. As you mentioned, he has had that Heisman moment this season, and he is that guy on that team. He is the guy that if they weren't with him, what would they be?
Right. Okay, so for my number 3, I'm going to put Kenneth Walker III, because even though he did not play well last weekend, he already had his Heisman moment against Michigan, and it was literally the reason that Michigan State won that matchup. Now, obviously, he did not play well last weekend, but he was a little banged up, and you can't expect people to play well banged up. So I'm going to go on and put him at number 3. Who do you have at number 2?
I'm a little more harsher, I guess, when it comes down to that. And number 1 and 2, this is where it gets spicy. I'm going to go ahead and put C.J. Stroud at number 2 because, and I had him at number 2 last week, and I'm going to stick with it. Going into that game against Michigan State, they were going against the worst passing defense in the entire country. And as you have mentioned, he has the best team around him. He's got wide receivers who are going to torch any defensive backfield that struggles, and they went into a struggling defensive backfield. So I think that's what his numbers reflected. But 35 out of 32 completions out of 35 passes, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm going to go C.J. Stroud at number 2 too. And I don't feel like it's controversial because we were still waiting for C.J. Stroud to really have his Heisman moment, and he hadn't had it yet. And like I said, and keep saying, he has so many weapons around him. It was almost arguably like, okay, are we sure that it's him? Obviously, he has the stats, but he also has the people around him that are helping him pad those stats. And I feel like our number 1 is going to be the same.
Yeah, our number 1 is Bryce Young. And I think it would have been different had he not played the way that he did against Arkansas this weekend. Because we see C.J. Stroud blow up in the early games, and then Bryce Young comes out in the later games and breaks the Alabama single-game passing record against Arkansas. And Arkansas is a team that's still ranked in the top 25 by the College Football Playoff Committee. And I was talking with our producer, Madison, shout out to her, and we were looking at, all right, what has Stroud gone against this season and what has Young gone against? Stroud has gone against 12th-ranked Oregon, 20th-ranked Penn State, 19th-ranked Purdue, and 7th-ranked Michigan State, while Young has had 14th Miami, 11th Florida, 12 Ole Miss, and then 21 Arkansas. So he has gone against better talent, if you want to say that in a way.
I mean, he broke records this weekend, 559 passing yards. He is a bucket, and he's been consistent the entire season. So I feel like we can say that he's number 1. Faux show. All right, my bad. My bad, C.J. Stroud. You went from 5 to 2. Congratulations on that. All right, we're going to have a little conversation with SEC Network analyst Chris Doering to get his thoughts on the Heisman race, of course. But first, I have to ask about the Biletnikoff because a lot of people were up in arms when they saw the announcement of who the finalists were this week. So what were your thoughts on this list?
Well, obviously there were a lot of guys that were omitted that have put up some tremendous stats. But what a difficult job it is in this day and age of college football where teams are largely throwing the football around a lot more than they ever used to before. So even as you look at the 3 finalists, they're guys, you could probably put the Ohio State trio up there and make those guys worthy nominees of being in the finalist role. But I look at Jameson Williams. I have a chance to watch him every weekend covering Alabama and the SEC Network. This guy is explosive with the ball in his hands, has become a better route runner, still needs to polish some of the catching consistency up a little bit, but he's as dangerous as they've become. And for a fast guy, really runs routes as well as I've seen somebody with that type of speed running. Typically, you don't see guys get in and out of breaks as well as he does, but has become the go-to player both on the deep balls, taking the top off the top of the defenses and also with some of the slants where he's able to take it the distance after catching a 5-yard pass and turning it into a 50-yard gain.
Well, then it sounds like he's your favorite out of all the three guys. So is there a close second or third in your opinion?
Well, if I'm looking at guys that were omitted, I was initially going to go with Chris Olave, and then I started thinking a little bit more about what Garrett Wilson does in terms of the totality of that offense. He does not only the deep assignments that they ask him to do, but he's a guy that certainly can go over the middle of the field, can catch the short passes, and take it the distance too. So if I had to go with one of the Ohio State guys that wasn't included, I would probably go with Garrett Wilson.
All right, now let's switch gears to the Heisman conversation because that's exactly what we're here for. C.J. Stroud had an amazing game last week. Obviously, Bryce Young has been pretty consistent over the course of the season. Have any of these quarterbacks stood out to you in this Heisman race?
Well, I'll tell you guys, I was a big Matt Corral guy in the preseason and into the regular season. Did have that down game against Auburn, so I think it cost him. But you're right. Bryce Young is one of these guys that comes in. You're talking about him being one of the most heralded recruits from a couple of years ago, and then all of a sudden takes over for Mac Jones, and you're thinking, wow, he's not going to be able to put up any sort of comparable type numbers. And he's not only lived up to it, he's exceeded that hype. I look at this guy, the way he's evolved throughout the season, not only throwing the ball, but now becoming more of a threat running it as well. I can tell you this, as a former wide receiver, nothing worse than watching a quarterback, you come out of your break and you see the quarterback running the ball. He always scrambles in an effort to let guys uncover, and that's a really tough thing for a secondary member to have to cover for 4, 5, 6 seconds. So I think Bryce Young has gotten more comfortable. I love when he's operating out of the empty set, really has a great feel for what defenses are trying to show him, and that ability to scramble and let those receivers uncover is one of the things I think that separates him from a lot of the other great quarterbacks in college football this year.
Yeah, I agree. And he had a big weekend as well. It just wasn't Stroud that has a big weekend.
Right.
But out of the Heisman favorites, let's talk about a sleeper. We talked about sleepers here last week. Do you have any sleepers who people are kind of underlooking?
Guys, I know it's going to sound like I'm an SEC homer and that I love Alabama, but I'm going with another Crimson Tide guy. I don't care what you say. I think Will Anderson is the best player in college football. And I know that defensive players don't typically get the kind of love that they deserve. But unlike Jordan Davis, you have a much more quantifiable performance from Will Anderson this year. He leads the country in sacks at 13.5, leads the country in tackles for loss by 5.5 tackles. I mean, the next closest guy is 5.5 tackles behind him. So he is a game wrecker. You talk to any defensive coordinator, what they want the most is a guy that can disrupt and a guy that has to be paid attention to every single down. Will Anderson is that guy. And the most impressive part about it is I think there's nobody else on that defense to take the attention away from him. Everybody knows he's the big focal point, but yet none of them have been able to block him. He's just been an unbelievable wrecking ball this year.
So I know you said you didn't want to sound like an SEC guy, but I do know that you do want to rep Florida all that you can. It is rivalry week, and FSU Florida is happening this weekend. Both teams are 5-6, so this has bowl implications for sure. What is your expectation in the matchup this week?
Yeah, my expectation is that I have no idea what Florida's mindset's going to be like, right? You mentioned bowl implications. How many of these players or even coaches care about the bowl implications? I heard somebody talk about, they want to get those extra 15 practices in. These coaches don't care about that. Most of them won't even be coaching at Florida next year. So the most important thing that I'm hanging my hat on as a Florida guy is that these guys hate Florida State as much as I do, and they want to go off a winner against one of their biggest rivals. And most importantly, send those seniors off. The last game in the swamp, it's been a tumultuous run for them here. Send them out winners, and hopefully Florida will have the focus that they need to get over a trending Florida State team at this point.
Do you feel like, you mentioned that you hope that they hate FSU as much as you do. Do you feel like they do? Do you feel like that still happens in college football?
For sure.
I feel like sometimes it doesn't feel like it does, just like the same as it did in the good old days.
Yeah, at Florida, though, Florida, you can point to Georgia, LSU, they got Tennessee, a number of different rivals. I still think it means the most for Florida State, though, being an in-state rival with a lot of different guys having played high school football together and against one another. I think that familiarity breeds contempt, and it's sad to me to see this game being played at noon with 2 5-6 records. It's not typically what we've used to see from Florida State and Florida playing one another.
That is very true. Well, thanks so much, Chris. We'll see what happens this weekend. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks, guys.
I mean, I still stand by the fact that I feel like because of the transfer portal and guys leaving early, rivalry week doesn't feel as good as it did in the good old days. So let's talk about some of these rivalry week. That's a very hard thing to say, by the way. Rivalry week Heisman moments, the best Heisman moments in rivalry week history. And we start with Charles Woodson versus Ohio State. So this is 1997 when soon-to-be Heisman winner Charles Woodson juked multiple Buckeyes defenders to score this iconic punt.
Yes, sir. The rose, too, in the mouth.
Touchdown. I mean, that's the way to do it.
Legendary.
That was like the touchdown and turnover gifts before they were like a thing. He was the original.
Yeah. We got Ricky. All right, 1 year later, Texas's Ricky Williams, he set the all-time FBS rushing record with a boom. Check out the 60-yard touchdown, Christine. Stop, got the block, and there he got it in for 6. That was against Texas A&M. He won the Heisman that same year. What a moment right here. Ricky Williams was that guy.
I mean, he was. He still kind of is. All right, let's move on to Derrick Henry. This one is versus Auburn, and this is in 2015. Alabama's Derrick Henry locked up his Heisman when he outgained Auburn's entire team during the Iron Bowl. He rushed for 271 yards with 46 carries and a touchdown. This feels like it wasn't that long ago. And also, I always picture, you know that picture of Derrick Henry standing next
I know exactly.
oh my goodness, where he looked like he was not human.
Was he standing next to Mark Henry?
Yes. And it was like, bro, Mark Ingram. Are you a human? Are you a human?
Well, clearly not, because if he was still playing, he'll be MVP. But now we got Baker Mayfield, all right? Before all the commercials, it's worth mentioning that he tore it up in this game. He had 5 touchdowns in a wild 62-52 win over Oklahoma State. And man, this was a heck of a game. I remember them going back and forth in this one. They scored like 100 points.
We get Bedlam this weekend, and I'm very excited about that matchup because it's always a really good one. Another really good one that we get this weekend is Michigan versus Ohio State.
What a moment.
This is the most iconic. 30 years and a day ago, Desmond Howard hit the Heisman post after scoring a punt return touchdown versus Ohio State. He would go on to win the Heisman. And, I mean, we talk to Des all the time. So let's just hear about this exact moment in his own words, because you just got to hear this.
I was dating the gymnast, right? And I had this girl teach me how to do a backflip because I thought it would be the coolest thing to break out down the field, stop at about the 1 yard line, and do a backflip into the end zone. As I became the front runner for the Heisman, fast forward to that game in late November and we're playing the Buckeyes. Here's my golden opportunity.
Nice high kick, got a little wind under it.
Catch the punt, racing down the left sideline. Saw the punter. At this point, I'm thinking, am I going to do this backflip? I would say probably around the 8 yard line going in. I kind of chickened out because I figured if I didn't do it right, then I'm on SportsCenter for the wrong thing. And I did that pose, which I think turned out to be better than doing a backflip.
All right, we're going to talk about the 30-year anniversary of Desmond Howard's Heisman, which, not to make Des sound old or feel old, but I mean, it has been 30 years, and we're going to bring in Heather Dinich to talk about it because you got to do a piece on .com about this anniversary, and I kind of talked to you a little bit about it and how excited you were to be able to do this piece. What was your favorite moment about writing this piece for Des?
My favorite moment is just, well, 2 things. One, Desmond is as genuine as he comes across on game day. His smile and his laugh, he is just such a funny, enjoyable, kind human being. And to be able to spend time with him, I did about a 30-minute Zoom with him this summer, interviewing him, and continued to go back and talk to him more and more about it as I interviewed other people involved in it. And when I was out there for game day at the Oregon at UCLA, when I saw you to speak to him more, at that point, I was able to tell him so much more about what Ohio State players had said and get his reaction to that. And we sat there and he laughed. He's like, I never heard that before. And you know how he laughs on game day. And it was just real. He was like, oh my gosh, that's funny. He was never going to catch me. He was talking about Alan autograph and read. And I really enjoyed having fun talking to him. And the other part that was so fun was talking to the Ohio State players, because you know what a cutthroat rivalry this is. You know how much it means to both of these teams. But the Ohio State guys were able to have fun with it because time has passed, and they realized they were on the wrong side of history in this. And I would tell them, I was like, if I could just get you guys in a bar to talk about this play, it would make for great TV, because they just had so much fun talking about it.
Yeah, I love the reaction from the players, and great job on the piece, by the way. Anybody, check it out on ESPN.com. You kind of scroll through it, and it's like an interactive type of feature story, which I thought was really fun. But out of all of this, the thing that surprised me the most was Desmond saying he thought that he was going to do a backflip going into the end zone. I mean, did that surprise you as well?
Yes, and the thing about Desmond is, and everyone I talked to told me this, was that was not his style. It wasn't his style to do anything. But at that point, he was a front runner for the Heisman. It was the Ohio State game, and everybody was kind of egging him on. Come on, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I love how he talks you through it, and he just sort of eventually chickens out. And, I don't want to be on SportsCenter for the wrong reason. And that was what was so great about it was a spontaneous thing that he wound up doing, and it became one of the most iconic poses in college football history. And that's not what he did. That's not who he was all season long. He described it as the Barry Sanders, just turn around, hand the ball to the official, and move on. And that's how Michigan was. That's how the team was coached. The team. It's not about you in the end zone. And his head coach, Gary Mueller, hadn't even known that he did it. And he was walking to the press conference, and the sports information director was like, they're going to ask you about Desmond. And coach was like, what do you mean? And he had to fill him in and let him know what happened, because the coach had turned around on the sideline to go on to the next play and hadn't even realized what had happened. So all of those little backstories were so much fun to find out.
I love that. Okay, so let's fast forward 30 years, because we do have to figure out who's going to win the Heisman this season. And we got Ohio State, Michigan this weekend. There's a guy on Ohio State teams that's trying.
Just some guy.
He's just a random guy that's trying to make a Heisman campaign a reality for him. Is there anybody that has stood out to you the most this football season?
This has been such a wide open, difficult Heisman race to pin down. And I think at this point, for me, as a Heisman voter, I'm paying attention to CJ Stroud and Bryce Young this weekend. The numbers that they have put up, especially last weekend, have been eye-popping. I mean, in terms of the completion percentage for both of them, what they're doing for their team. And I think it increases a notch this week because Michigan's pass defense is much better than Michigan State's, and it was a recipe for disaster last week when you look at that offense against Michigan State's defense and that secondary. It was a no-win situation, and Ohio State has so many weapons that it's a gamble no matter what you do if you're a defensive coordinator, right? So to me, I'm very curious to see what those two quarterbacks are able to do this weekend. I have honestly, truly not made up my mind yet as a Heisman voter. I'm letting this thing play out because a lot can still happen.
I will say that I do not envy you, because it sounds like a very tough job this season.
Yeah,
very tough job.
Definitely.
So good luck. I feel like this weekend and next weekend we'll kind of iron things out a little bit more for you. But thanks so much for joining us, Heather, as always.
Thank you, Heather.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
All right, guys, so this is what we have going on this weekend. I will say that I am most excited about watching Kenneth Walker III hopefully redeem himself against Penn State. What are you most looking forward to?
I'm just going to be cliche here and say Ohio State, Michigan, number 2 versus number 5. Christine, you're going to be at that game. The Heisman favorite, C.J. Stroud, has a chance to show out against a good defense now. Not no poo-poo defense in the Spartans.
Not a poo-poo defense. I'm most excited about that game because it has a lot of CFP implications as well. So we'll see what happens this weekend. Obviously, Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud at the top of this conversation, but who knows what could happen. Anything can happen. Thanks so much for joining us on the Heisman Show presented by Nissan, premier partner of the Heisman Trophy. We will be right back here next week to talk about all the chaos that I'm sure is going to happen this upcoming weekend.
Who wants it?
It's mine.